This is Title 18, Word Crimes. I'm Eric Arneson. This episode was recorded live at a Noir at the Bar event in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, home of my alma mater, Temple University. John McGoran, author of the eco-thrillers Drift and Dead Out, organized the event, which served as a kind of unofficial kickoff to the fantastic NoirCon convention, which takes place every 2 years in the city of brotherly love. Altogether, 12 authors read their work at the Misconduct Tavern in Philly. Here on the Word Crimes podcast, I'm dividing the event into 3 parts. This is part 1, with readings by Thom Nickels, Jen Conley, Samuel Starnes, and Matt Cooke. Special thanks to our MC, Peter Rozovsky, who writes the award-winning blog Detectives Beyond Borders, where he focuses on international crime. Peter does a wonderful job introducing everyone, so, you know what? Let's get right to it. This is Noir at the Bar, Philadelphia.
Thom Nickels' book, Legendary Locals of Center City, Philadelphia, was published this year. His Literary Philadelphia appears next year. His poetry and other writing has appeared in Van Gogh's Ear, the Huffington Post, the New Oxford Review, the Broad Street Review. He also writes for Icon Magazine, Philadelphia Spirit newspapers, and the Weekly Press. Thom Nickels.
Thank you very much, Peter and Lou Boxer. It's good to be here. My friend Eric said he wanted to talk to me as a journalist. His hands were shaking and his tone was somber. I was concerned. I'm a wreck, he said. Yesterday, I was having lunch with a friend in Restaurant 19 atop the Bellevue. Not far from me was a couple, a man and a woman, maybe in their late 60s. At some point, the woman got up to go to the ladies' room, and as soon as she left, the man got up from the table, walked over to the restaurant's huge balcony window, and jumped out. What? I said. He jumped while a waitress who witnessed it all fainted on the floor. Management then ushered everybody out of the place. I haven't been able to sleep since. The distressed look on Eric's face told me that he could not stop replaying the incident in his head. I even spotted the couple on the way up to 19 in the elevator, he said. The man was standing in the rear of the car. What I want to know is, why wasn't there anything about this in the news? There was nothing in the newspapers, nothing on TV. There's been no reporting on it at all. He asked if I would help find out what happened. I'll try, I said, while warning him that officials get tight-lipped when it comes to suicide. It's human nature, I suppose, to want to put a name to the victims of tragedy. Because Eric is a Catholic priest, I assumed he wanted to pray for the guy. Why the man jumped off the balcony is, of course, a bigger question. Was the lunch at 19 a prelude to a nasty divorce settlement? Had he been diagnosed with early Alzheimer's? Or did he, at age 68, suddenly wake up and find that his life, or all of life, was meaningless? This much was true. That sing-song line, tired of living but scared of dying, held no meaning here. The man acted, and he acted in a very public way, as if his intent was to create a spectacle. Back at my desk, I checked local news venues and found nothing about the death. A man jumps from a Center City restaurant shortly after noon, and there's no information about it anywhere. For years, of course, I'd been hearing about the suppression of suicide stories in the news because of their unpleasant nature. News outlets, many of them anyway, don't want to upset readers, although they thrive on stories about mass murder. As for the families of suicides, it's easy to understand why they wouldn't want the truth published in obituaries. Obituary writers have developed a new tact when the unpleasant S word comes up. They use the code words "died suddenly." But a man falling out of the sky in broad daylight in Center City is both a news story and a public event. It's a very public event when the choice is to jump on or near Broad Street during lunch hour. At that time of day, thousands of people and vehicles are moving up and down from north to south. Jumping into the middle of this triples the chances of falling on top of someone. The only thing missing from a spectacle like this is advanced PR from Cashman and Associates, which might then guarantee a formal audience. I called 19 to confirm that a patron had jumped from the restaurant's balcony window. We have no comments, sir, I was told. Now, don't lie to me. You've got plenty of comments inside that head of yours, and some scary thoughts, too, I wanted to add, but didn't. Instead, I took Father Eric's route and explained that I was sorry about the episode, and that telling me the truth about it would in no way enshrine the restaurant as a best of Philly suicide destination. Their response after that was the same. We have no comments, sir. Bellevue management was less robotic. They confirmed that there was a death on the sidewalk in front of the hotel, but they would not confirm that the victim had jumped. But a death in front of the hotel could mean anything. A passerby who suffered a stroke, a random shooting, or a hit and run, but not necessarily a suicide. I was told to call the police, but when I did that, giving them the date and time of the incident based on Eric's report, I was informed that somebody would get back to me by the end of the day. The day came and went, and so did the weekend and most of the following Monday with no return call. On Tuesday, I called the police again. They'd forgotten about the promise of a return call, and was informed that I had to call the medical examiner's office. The medical examiner's office told me that their contact person would get back to me. This took another 2 days. When I was finally able to give Eric a name, I also learned that the jumper had leaped onto a side alley off Broad Street and had landed next to the Hyatt at the Bellevue's iconic red telephone booth, probably the only telephone booth of its kind on the East Coast. The story called to mind, with a name, it wasn't difficult to track down the man's obituary, which stated that he lived with his wife in North Jersey and that he had died suddenly. The story called to mind conversations with my 95-year-old great-aunt in the years prior to her death. Dottie would often comment on what it was like to get old. She'd talk about what life was like for her when she was in her 60s, the time when health problems surface, while adding that the 70s are more balanced. Once you turn 80, she said, watch out. 80, Dottie liked to say, was when the body began to not let you do the things you wanted to do. She repeated the phrase, everything in moderation, many times. She smoked 1 cigarette a day, enjoyed ships of Surrey and a good rum and Coke, but never more than 2 drinks per day. When I would have lunch with her and hit the sherry hard, she'd look at me disapprovingly. She loved hiking on the trails near Valley Green Inn. She loved grapefruit, cantaloupes, grilled cheese sandwiches, and Spam. She went to church every Sunday and made it a point to tell everyone that she never used water on her face, but instead dabbled it at night with something called Abilene cream. At 80, she looked 50. Relatives would ask her, did you sign a pact with Mephistopheles? About life's ups and downs, she was philosophical and often called her life the agony and the ecstasy, after the Michelangelo biography by Irving Stone. In her blunt German manner, she told me there were many times when she felt like just going to sleep and not waking up. One of her worst personal tragedies occurred after World War I, when her fiancé, who had been in Europe at the front, returned home and broke off the engagement without a word of explanation. She'd often show me his picture, which she had in a special box on her dresser drawer. On the back of the photograph, she'd written, Bill Stanton, the love of my life. The dashing, smiling, uniformed figure didn't look like the kind of guy who would mysteriously break off an engagement. She described the time after the breakup as an extreme low point when life did not seem worth living, when in fact the option of going to sleep forever seemed like a good escape. But had she climbed to the top of City Hall Tower and jumped down into City Hall courtyard, into a crowd of pedestrians and politicians, where there are no iconic red telephone booths, by the way, she would have missed the real love of her life, a man she was with for almost 40 years. Thank you.
Thanks. Jen Conley, is she here?
Yeah.
Okay, Jen Conley. Her stories have appeared in Thuglit, Needle, Beat to a Pulp, Out of the Gutter, Grand Central, Noir, and others, so I don't think she writes cozies. She's an editor at Shotgun Honey, and she's been nominated for a Spine Tingler Award, as well as shortlisted for Best American Mystery Stories. She lives in North Jersey. Jen Conley. Yay, North Jersey.
Central's better.
Central Jersey.
Hi, I actually wrote something for this, but it's really new and it hasn't been published, and there's too many of you here, so I'm going to read something that I'm just too nervous. I'm going to read something that I wrote a while ago. My grandmother she grew up in an orphanage and in New York City, and she used to tell me these fun stories, but one of the things she had told me that when she got out of the orphanage, she went and lived with her aunt, and her aunt had given her a hat pin, and apparently all the women in New York would walk around with hat pins in their pockets, and if the men got fresh, they'd jab them with them on the subway. So I thought it was a cute story, but and then I turned it into a creepy noir story. So this is called Hat Pin. It'd been 5 weeks since Irene O'Connell's father collected her from the Dominican convent of Our Lady of the Rosary Orphanage on 63rd Street. He turned up on a June day in '39, driving a borrowed Model T Ford, not mentioning the borrowed part until they were well into the Bronx. Irene was 16, old enough to live at home again and take a job in a sewing factory. The factory was hot and dusty, although the women said in the winter it would be cold and dusty, so pick your hell. 6 days a week, Irene took the subway alone downtown to work. Her father drove a delivery truck, delivering cheese, he claimed. Sometimes he was gone for days. Your old man ain't delivering no cheese, Miss Mulligan from across the hall said. Gin maybe, but no cheese. She was a pretty woman with gorgeous red hair and a small waist. She said she'd, too, gone to the orphanage when her mother died and her father couldn't take care of her. The phone in the hall rang often, and it was usually for her. Mary Mulligan around, they'd ask. Miss Mulligan gave Irene a brass hat pin with a lady sitting on a crescent moon at one end and a sharp point at the other. For when them men on the subway get fresh. Then she added darkly, or if that fella your father has boarding in the apartment tries something, you poke him with it. Keep it in your pocketbook and keep that close by. Mr. Rozovsky was a friend of Irene's father, and he slept on the couch in the parlor. Irene didn't engage with the man much. She heard him come in after midnight, stumble around. If she got up to go to the bathroom, the stink of liquor and beer wafted through the parlor like rancid milk. In the morning, she'd see Mr. Rozovsky on the couch, his head faced toward the ceiling, eyes closed, his mouth open like a corpse. He did get fresh with her. He cornered her in the middle of the night when she walked into the kitchen to get her pocketbook. She left it on the table, and the thought woke her. There he was, Mr. Rozovsky, leaning against the small stove, swaying from drink, watching her as she slipped by to grab her pocketbook. She caught his eye, and he grinned slowly, pushed her onto the table. Doll, he muttered, while he tried to kiss her. Irene jerked the hat pin out of the pocketbook and stabbed him in his left leg. God damn it, he screamed, jumping back, knocking against the stove before falling sideways towards the icebox. He pulled the pin out of his leg, threw it across the room. Irene went for her purse on the table. Her money was in there, and then tried to escape, but he got a hold of her again. She had no pin, but she was able to get her hand around the handle of a cast iron pan left on the stove. She swung it like a small axe, smashed it into his head. He buckled to the floor, and blood oozed from his temple. Later, Miss Mulligan stood in the kitchen. "Them boys get too drunk these days. They fall and hit their heads." "He didn't fall, Miss Mulligan." Irene was sick with guilt. She'd committed murder. Hell awaited her, no matter how long she lived on earth. "Oh, sure he fell, honey. I seen it with my own 2 eyes. Then she winked and snapped the gum she was chewing. "Go wash the pan and we'll find something he banged his head on." The pretty woman's head scanned the tiny kitchen, noticed something in the corner, like that metal stool over there. "But I murdered him." "No, you pushed him away and he hit his head." "The police will never believe that." Mary leaned down, picked the hat pin off the floor, placed it through her gorgeous red hair, right above her left ear. The lady on the moon glistened in the kitchen light. Mary posed like a glamour girl and smiled, the devil glinting in her eyes. "How much you want to bet?"
Thanks. Our next reader from the Deep South Jersey, is Joe Samuel Starnes. His second novel, Fall Line, was selected to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Best of the South list. His novel, Red Dirt, a tennis novel, is due this coming spring. Sam?
All right, thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm going to read something from Fall Line. This is a novel that takes place all in one day in 1955 when a river is being dammed up to build a big lake. In the scene I'm going to read, the main character, Elmer Blizzard, is standing in a graveyard near his home where all the coffins have been removed, including his mama's. He's in a foul mood. Here, roaming from across the cleared land and saw up Sills Road a pulpwood truck loaded with a stack of cut pine logs, its chains hanging and clanking, the engine groaning under the heavy weight. Dust kicked up at the sides of the truck as it motored toward the intersection of Finley Shoals and shifted into a lower gear and lurched as the clutch popped and the transmission caught hold and it slowed down, but strengthened the traction of the thick tires. A covey of quail near the side of the road in the grassy open spot took flight at the noise, scattering like brown specks over the blue-green horizon in the low southern sky. The truck driver slowed to watch the flapping fat birds. Elmer walked between the open graves to what had been the McKibben plot so he could get a look at the quails settling back down in the distance. The truck came on and stopped near the old graveyard about 50 yards from where he was standing. The driver rolled down his window and waved at Elmer, gesturing for him. "Hey, boy, come over here." The man's voice was gruff. Elmer held his ground, just staring, while the man continued to summon him. "Hey!" the man yelled and waved again. Elmer didn't answer. The black-haired pulpwooder with leathery skin opened the truck door and climbed out and came around the front of the white cab, the engine idling rough. He was tall and had an enormous gut that hung down in a tucked white T-shirt like a sack over his belt, filling the shirt as tight as a water balloon that shook as he walked. His dark hair was slicked up high from his forehead in a pompadour and fiercely parted on one side. Elmer stood and watched him come, his large fists clenched, his eyes set hard. The man walked to the edge of the graveyard and studied on it for a minute, as though surprised to see the ground pockmarked with holes. He walked as close as he could get to Elmer, about the distance of a baseball pitcher to home plate, without stepping onto the cemetery grounds. His rough skin had the look of a fresh-oiled baseball glove. "Son, didn't you see me waving at you?" "Yes, sir, I saw you." "Well, why didn't you come over to me?" "Just didn't." "You dumb boy, or is you a haint?" "I ain't nary of the two. I just don't got to take no orders from you." "You what?" "I ain't being bossed by no pulpwooder in my own home." "You in the graveyard, you dumbass." Elmer extended his right arm rigid in front of him and let his middle finger point to the sky. "Fuck you," he said. The man walked into the cemetery and came for Elmer, winding a fast path around the open graves. Elmer instantly regretted leaving his gun in his truck and considered rushing to it, but instead held his ground. He'd never run from anyone. He clenched his fist and dug in his heels, and the big man was soon on him, throwing a punch that glanced off Elmer's forehead. The man was too tall for Elmer to punch squarely in the face, so he slugged the man's huge gut. It was like hitting a sack of feed, and the man didn't flinch, but kept coming and punching, and the weight of his body came behind it and pushed Elmer down onto the ground, and the pulpwood landed hard on top of him. The man smelled of sweat and coffee and pine trees and gasoline. Elmer scrabbled in the dirt to stay out of the two graves they were between, but the big man was hitting him, alternating between gut blows and head blows that hurt like hell with the big slow lumps of the man's fist, his girth pinning Elmer to the ground. Elmer pushed at the man and surged as hard as he could to get loose, sliding to the side, but the man clung to him. The earth began to fall away, and he and the man tumbled like an entwined couple 6 feet down into the hole, landing with a thud in the clumps of mud at the bottom of the empty grave where Waddy McKibben had rested for 15 years. All right, I'm going to condense a little bit some here so I can get to the end of the scene. They fall in, he gets the wind knocked out of him, he beats on him a little more. Finally, the pissed-off pulpwooder climbs out of the grave, and he's looking down on the grave whose Elmer's still in the bottom of the hole. "You dumb sumbitch," the man said, his voice had grown, raspier than before. "All I wanted you is to tell me the way back to town." Elmer didn't say anything and kept his eyes averted away from the man over the hole, his face hard to make out against the backdrop of the bright blue midday sky. "Well, which way is it, you sorry sumbitch?" The man weaved a little as though he was losing his balance. You want me to get in there and kick your ass some more? I get in there again, I'll leave you so you ain't ever getting out. I'll give you a real ass whooping." Elmer pointed the direction of town and looked at the man. "Turn right at the road. That'll take you in." The man let forth a short laugh, almost a grunt, and said, "Let me thank you." The pulpwooder pulled off his filthy T-shirt, and his gut sagged ponderous and white in the sunlight. He slowly undid his fly and reached shakily into his pants. Elmer put his hands over his face. A moment or two passed before he heard a stream and immediately felt a warm rain of acrid urine come splashing down on him. Y'all would have done the same. All right, jumping ahead here. Elmer's still hurting. He manages to get out, and he's wet too. He crawls out of the hole, and he sees the pulpwooder at his truck, and the pulpwooder's in some sort of serious distress. Elmer goes over to his truck and gets his .38 revolver and an old rusty short-handled shovel from his pickup truck and approaches him. Elmer stepped closer, moving in slowly. The man's face was twisted, a dark red with hints of blue, and his eyes were crazy, one bulging and the other barely open. He was gasping for breath, his mouth gaped wide and his tongue swollen and purple. He held his right hand on the steering wheel as though he was hanging onto a cliff. The man's left hand clutched at his bare chest. When Elmer approached, the man reached out in a gesture for help. Elmer tucked the pistol into the back of his breeches and then gripped the shovel like a baseball bat. He raised it over his head and stepped forward and swung the flat side of the blade squarely into the man's forehead, knocking him loose from the steering wheel. The pulpwood man slid from the open truck door and collapsed onto the ground like several bags of fertilizer bound together, desperately grabbing at the seat and the gear shift as he fell, unable to catch his hands on any surfaces and hold himself up. He slid down onto his ass and tried to sit but couldn't. He ended up supine on the ground next to the truck, the engine still rumbling, his arms twitching at his sides. The man's ponderous belly rose and fell with his labored breathing. He groaned and seemed to say something about Jesus, but all else that came from his mouth was unintelligible garble. Elmer looked down at the man's face, blood beginning to flow into his eyes from the wound squaring his brow. "Who's getting ass-whooping now?" he said. In a one long loop of motion, he raised the shovel and swung it down hard and flat across the top of the pulpwooder's face. The rusty metal gave off a solid low ding, pressing the back of the man's head into the red earth. Thank you.
All right, next up is Matt Cooke, and from his the short bio I have here, he's a pretty boring guy. He's the author of Sabotage, which he wrote at the age of 19 while an undergraduate at Stanford. While there, he also published 2 nonfiction books, and he co-founded a non-profit organization dedicated to government transparency. He's also a professional close-up magician, as I'm sure many of us are, and he has performed in Hollywood and throughout the civilized world. Matt Cooke.
Thanks very much, Peter. And it's a thrill to be here and meet you all. I'd like to start out actually with a little demonstration of something that's in the book, which is the principle of misdirection. One of the characters in the book he dabbles in magic. And so one of the primary principles in magic is being able to divert people's attention and make them think about something else at the right time. So could I get a volunteer from the audience, Dennis DeFoya? Come on up. Give Dennis a big round of applause. Come on up. Dennis. A little bird told me you'd be great for this. Have a seat.
Make him disappear. I was going to say, everyone take pictures.
So, I promise this isn't even a magic trick. This is actually just a little demonstration. It's a psychological experiment to see if we can have a little misdirection here. So here, we're going to play a game, and the way the game is going to work is I'm going to ask 5 questions, and all you have to do to win is answer every question incorrectly. Should be easy enough, right? All you have to do is answer every question, 5 questions in a row, incorrectly. So here we go. We're going to share the mic,
Awesome.
and so make sure they can hear you. Okay.
All right.
So here we go. We're going to start now, and the first question is, what is your name?
John.
Where are you right now?
Trenton, New Jersey.
What are you doing?
Eating frozen yogurt.
How many was that?
Sorry? It was 3. Shit.
All right. Give Dennis a big round. Thank you. Now, sometimes if they answer incorrectly on that 4th question, you then say, "Oh, you've played this before, haven't you?" And then they say no right away, and you got them on that last one. So anyhow, I'm going to read a very brief segment here, just a little bit of the prologue. Arctic winds drove needles of ice into the trespasser's skin. As the prickling sensation faded to numbness, he pulled a black ski mask over his head and fought to bring his pulse below 100 beats. He crouched low, donning a pair of leather gloves. Warm fingers meant nimble fingers. Tonight, he needed both. The runway followed a paved line to a small network of taxiways. He spotted hangars at the far end of the tarmac. Zeroing in on one of the buildings, he sprinted toward the compound. A chain-link fence blocked access. Finding easy footholds, he scaled the barrier and snipped off a section of barbed wire before pocketing his pliers and climbing over the edge. Losing his grip, he landed with a loud thud. Too loud, as he could hear his fall over the rhythmic drumming in his ears. Sweat plastered his hair to his scalp. He scanned the area for signs of danger and took several moments to recover. The compound appeared empty. After 5 minutes of absolute stillness, he began to crawl, adhering to the shadowy perimeter and following the fence to a cluster of buildings. He arrived at a recessed portal that pushed open with ease. He softened his stride as he entered the hangar, where a metallic bird nested in the center of the room. A sleek burgundy fuselage, flamed underbelly, hot red propeller, and matching elevator suggested a free and defiant nature. The biplane's double wings stretched wide, angling skyward. Even in the dark, she found a way to glisten. The man paced beside the undercarriage and ran a glove along the body. He wasted no time. Checking his watch, he hoisted himself into the cockpit and inspected the helm and controls. Producing a small box of tools from his coat pocket, his delicate fingers inserted a skinny rod near the yoke and loosened 4 screws. He worked with the skill of a locksmith. But for all his paraphernalia, he was no expert infiltrator. He'd failed to notice any movement behind him. Soon after he'd climbed the fence, an automobile had cut its engine and parked outside the airfield, not 200 yards from the trespasser's vehicle. The car's passenger stole into the hangar and concealed himself behind a stack of storage crates, his gaze never leaving the intruder. As the man in the ski mask groped around the cockpit, the newcomer reached into his rucksack, pulled out a camera, and trained its high optical zoom on the prowler's busy work. 24 snapshots later, he packed away his device and continued to observe. Thanks for having me, and thanks again to Dennis.
That was Noir at the Bar, Philadelphia, recorded live on October 29th, 2014. You can find links to all of the authors featured on this episode and more in the show notes on my website, ericarneson.com. That's erikarneson.com. Every episode of the Title 18 Word Crimes podcast is archived at ericarneson.com. I'm also at Eric Arneson on Twitter and easy to find on Facebook. That's all for this episode of Title 18 Word Crimes. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. Future episodes will feature more from this event, Noir at the Bar in Philly. Plus, you don't want to miss my partner in Word Crimes, Scott Detro, reading a short story by Anthony Award winner Johnny Shaw. The music on this episode is by The Throws. You can find them at The Throws, THROES, thethrows.com. Thanks again for listening to Title 18 Word Crimes. We'll be back soon.